On a cold morning in Chicago, Illinois, a struggling woman gave her last $5 to a homeless man being mocked by passers-by. She had no idea that this small act would open a door she never imagined. Because the man she helped wasn't just any beggar, he was a millionaire in disguise, testing the kindness of strangers. And what happened next changed everything. This story will make you rethink kindness, fate, and the hidden opportunities in everyday life. Stay with us until the end. You won't want to miss this lesson that could change your perspective forever. And if you enjoy captivating stories like this, hit subscribe to never miss the next unexpected twist. Rachel Evans had seen it all, but she never truly belonged. She was just a visitor in a world that wasn't made for her, a shadow moving through streets where no one acknowledged her presence. Her feet ached from hours of standing at the cafe, her arms sore from scrubbing office floors. But she kept pushing forward. Ethan needed his medicine. The bills were piling up, and exhaustion wasn't an option. She tightened her grip on the flimsy plastic grocery bag, fingers curling around its handles, as if holding on to something more than just bread and milk. And then she saw him. The man sat slumped against the towering iron gates of Whitmore Mansion, a home so massive it could house an entire neighborhood. Against its grandeur, he looked impossibly small. His coat was ragged, the fabric worn thin. His jeans were stained, torn at the knees. His shoes, if they could still be called that, were falling apart, soles barely hanging on laces long disintegrated. Beside him, a battered piece of cardboard leaned against the gate, its jagged edges curling with age. Scrawled across it, in shaky, uneven strokes, "I need help." Rachel slowed to a stop. She had seen homeless people before. She had seen men and women tucked away in dark alleyways, backs hunched against the cold, eyes downcast, to avoid the judgment of passing strangers. She knew how the world treated them. She had felt it herself in the wary glances, the subtle shifts of body language when people saw her counting loose change in the grocery line. But this was different. This was worse. And she wasn't the only one who noticed him. A well-dressed man in a navy blue suit strode by, polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement. He barely spared the beggar a glance before sneering, his expression twisting, as if just the sight of him left a bad taste in his mouth. He scoffed under his breath. "Disgusting! Get a damn job!" And then he walked away. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. A middle-aged couple, a woman in a pearl necklace and a man with a tie, knotted too tight, paused a few feet away. They stared, but not with pity. "They're everywhere now," the woman muttered, clicking her tongue. "Ever since they let them sleep near the quarter," her husband replied. "You give them a dime, and suddenly they think they belong here." Rachel's nails dug into her palm. And then the worst of it happened. A young guy, early 20s, blonde hair, expensive sneakers, earbuds tucked in, walked by with his phone in hand, barely looking up, until his foot accidentally nudged the homeless man's outstretched leg. "Ugh, what the hell?" The guy jumped back as if he had just stepped in filth, his face contorting in irritation. "Seriously, man, move the hell out of the way." The homeless man flinched but said nothing. He just shrank further into himself, arms tightening around his thin frame as if trying to disappear. The young man let out a dramatic sigh, shook his head, then, as if to prove a point, pulled a crumpled dollar bill from his pocket and tossed it at the man's feet. "Here, buy yourself a clue," he sneered before walking off. A fire burned hot in Rachel's chest. She wanted to say something, wanted to yell, wanted to make them see him, really see him the way she did. But she had learned long ago that people who looked down on others didn't change just because someone told them to. So instead, she moved. She didn't hesitate, didn't think twice. She stepped toward the man while the rest of the world walked away. She knelt beside him, the concrete cold beneath her knees, the hem of her coat brushing against the pavement. His shoulders were hunched, his head bowed. And when he finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, she saw it: exhaustion, despair, defeat. "Have you eaten?" she asked, her voice soft, careful. The man blinked as if unsure whether she was real. His lips dry and cracked parted slightly before he shook his head. No, not today." Rachel nodded, already reaching into her grocery bag. She pulled out the loaf of bread, pressed it into his hands, then fished out the last $5 bill from her coat pocket. "It's not much," she admitted, "but if you're hungry, you can come to my place. I don't have a lot, but what I have, I share." The man's fingers tightened around the bread, but his gaze remained locked on her. There was something in his expression, something like disbelief, like he was trying to understand why. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Rachel shrugged. "Maybe, but someone has to." And for the first time that day, the man smiled. James sat still for a long time, staring at the loaf of bread in his hands, as if it were something foreign, something he never expected to receive. His rough, calloused fingers, hardened by years of struggle, trembled slightly as they gripped the crinkling plastic. He swallowed dryly, his throat fighting against the rawness, against the words he wanted to say, but couldn't. The world had made him tough. It had beaten him down until he stopped expecting kindness until now. Rachel shifted slightly on the cold pavement, her knees still pressed against the concrete. The exhaustion still clung to her, but in this moment, something else held her in place, a quiet, almost sacred moment where someone who had been invisible for so long was finally seen. She didn't know why she stayed. Maybe it was the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of whatever he was carrying. Maybe it was his eyes, deep, tired eyes that seemed to say they had seen too much. His gaze stayed locked on the bread, as if it wasn't just food, but something far more valuable. Or maybe it was because Rachel had been there before, in different ways, in different places, knowing what it felt like to be ignored, dismissed, reduced to nothing more than a burden. Finally, he let out a slow, shaky breath. "Thank you." His voice was barely above a whisper. It was hoarse, strained, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. Or maybe just someone who had forgotten what gratitude felt like on his tongue. Rachel nodded slightly, shifting her weight. "It's just bread," she said, though deep down she knew it wasn't just bread. James shook his head slightly, still staring at the gift in his hands. "No." He paused. "It's not just bread." Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. A gust of wind blew through the street, lifting loose strands of hair from her hood. The city moved on around them, oblivious. People walked past, too caught up in their own worlds to notice what was happening on Oakwood Avenue. A couple glanced over but quickly looked away, unwilling to involve themselves in something they didn't understand. Something they didn't want to understand. Rachel watched him for a long moment before speaking again. "What's your name?" He hesitated. She could see the moment he considered lying, giving her a name that would be easy to forget. But after a pause, he exhaled slowly, like he was letting go of something unseen. "James," he finally said. Rachel nodded. "I'm Rachel." James studied her for a second, his gaze steady in a way that made her almost uncomfortable. Not because it was intrusive, but because it was rare. Because it had been so long since anyone had truly looked at her like that. James looked at her, really looked at her, as if for the first time someone acknowledged his existence. Rachel glanced down at his hands, at the loaf of bread he still hadn't opened. A dull ache settled in her chest. "How long have you been out here?" James let out a dry, humorless chuckle, the sound rough like gravel. "Long enough," he muttered. That wasn't good enough. Rachel wanted to ask more. She wanted to know how he ended up here, what had happened, if there was anyone who still thought about him, still cared whether he lived or died. But she had learned long ago that some questions carried too much weight, that some wounds were too deep to be opened by a stranger on Oakwood Avenue. So instead, she asked the question that had been lingering in the back of her mind since she first saw him. "Why do people treat you like that?" At first, James didn't react. He just sat there, the loaf of bread finally resting on his lap, his fingers absently tracing the ridges of the plastic. Then he exhaled, slow and tired, his shoulders sinking even further. "Because it's easy," he finally said. "Because when they see someone like me, they see a problem, an inconvenience, something easier to step around than deal with." Rachel's jaw tightened. She knew he wasn't wrong. James let out a low, bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I watch them, these people walking by. The way they look at me like I'm nothing, like I deserve to be here, like I must have done something to end up this way. And maybe that makes them feel better. Maybe that makes them feel safer." Rachel knew exactly what he meant. People needed reasons to justify why others suffered. Because it was easier that way to believe that someone deserved their suffering, that they had brought it upon themselves. It made the world feel less frightening. It made them believe that as long as they did everything right, they would never end up like James. James shook his head again, his expression unreadable. "They don't see me as a person," he murmured. "Just another thing to ignore." Rachel's fingers curled tighter around her coat sleeve. She should have been used to this by now. The world was cruel, she knew that better than most. But that didn't make it right. "You're wrong," she said after a pause. James glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. Rachel met his gaze, unwavering. "I see you." And she did. Not just a man in tattered clothes. Not just a beggar on the street. But a person. A man with a story. A man who once had a name that carried weight, who had dreams before life took them away. James held her gaze for a long moment. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something uncertain, something almost hopeful, though he didn't seem ready to believe it yet. Rachel glanced at the plastic bag in her lap, then back at him. "Are you going to eat that or just stare at it all day?" James's lips curled slightly, a fleeting smile. Small, but something. Finally, he tore open the plastic, broke off a piece of bread, and brought it to his mouth. Rachel let out a slow breath, only now realizing she had been holding it. The world kept moving around them. Cars rushed past. People walked by. Conversations hummed in the background. Yet amid the noise of the city, there was a moment of stillness. For the first time in a long time, James wasn't invisible. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the distant sounds of city life. The impatient honking of drivers, muffled laughter from pedestrians wrapped in scarves and heavy coats, the occasional rattle of a delivery truck bouncing over uneven pavement. But here, on this cold stretch of Oakwood Avenue, between towering Whitmore mansions and wrought iron gates, there was only silence. Rachel shifted slightly, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. The cold seeped through her coat into her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was too full. James had barely touched the $5 bill she had given him. He held it in his palm, his thumb absent-mindedly running over its worn edges as if the weight of it was heavier than it should have been. He didn't put it in his pocket. He just sat there staring at it, like it was something foreign, something he wasn't sure he was allowed to have. Rachel let out a slow breath, her warm exhale visible in the crisp morning air. "I get it," she finally said. James looked up at her, his dark eyes cautious. "Get what?" She hesitated, then shrugged. Feeling stuck, James studied her for a moment, then looked away. He leaned back against the iron gate, exhaling deeply. "Yeah," Rachel nodded, tightening her grip on her coat sleeves. "My husband died 2 years ago." Her voice wavered slightly. "Heart attack. No warning, no signs. 1 minute he was there, the next he wasn't." She swallowed hard, staring down at her lap. "I thought we had more time." She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "We always think we have more time." James said nothing. Rachel exhaled a bitter chuckle, escaping her throat. "We weren't rich, but we got by. He worked construction. I worked whatever jobs I could find. Then he died and everything collapsed. No backup plan, no safety net, just me trying to hold everything together." She let out a sharp breath, as if saying it out loud made it heavier. "I have 2 kids. One of them, Ethan, he's 6. He was admitted to the hospital this week. Pneumonia. Bad enough that they want to keep him there." She trailed off, her voice tightening. "But they won't, if I can't pay." James turned toward her, the sharpness in his eyes softening. Rachel forced a weak smile. 3 jobs. That's what it takes to keep a roof over our heads, food on the table. And even that's not enough." James exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "And people think poverty is a choice." Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, they love that one." The wind blew again, rattling the iron gate behind them. Rachel could feel James watching her, his gaze heavy, like he was seeing something in her she had spent years trying to hide. "And yet you keep going," he said finally. Rachel glanced at him. "What else am I supposed to do?" James tilted his head slightly, considering her. Then he let out a small breath and sat up straighter, rolling his shoulders like he was shaking off something unseen. His fingers tightened around the $5 bill before he slowly folded it and slipped it into his pocket. "I have money." Rachel blinked, confused. She let out a short, dry chuckle. "What?" James exhaled, as if bracing himself. He looked at her, then fully, his dark eyes steady, unblinking. "I'm not homeless," he said. "Not really." Rachel's stomach tightened. James straightened, resting his hands on his knees. "My name is James Whitmore," he said, his voice even deliberate. "I own one of the largest private investment firms in this city." He gestured toward the mansion behind them, the very one they were sitting in front of. "This house, it's mine." Silence. For a moment, Rachel could do nothing but stare. The words didn't make sense. She let out a breathless laugh. "You're joking." James didn't smile. "I'm not." Rachel's pulse pounded in her ears. She looked at him again, really looked at him, and suddenly the details that had seemed out of place before began to align. The way his voice carried authority even in softness. The way his posture had a certain quiet confidence. The way he had spoken about the world with the kind of knowing that only came from someone who had been on both sides of it. She shook her head. No, this doesn't make sense." James reached into the tattered jacket he was wearing and pulled something out. A sleek black leather wallet. He flipped it open. Inside, neatly tucked in one of the compartments, was an ID. James Whitmore, CEO. Rachel's stomach dropped. She looked up at him again, her mind racing, trying to piece it all together, trying to make sense of the absurdity of it. "Why?" she breathed. Why are you sitting out here like this? James's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes, something deeper, something raw. I wanted to see, he said. I wanted to know what it felt like to be ignored, to be looked at like I didn't belong. He exhaled slowly. I wanted to see how many people would walk by without stopping. Rachel couldn't find her voice. She thought about the people she had seen earlier, the sneers, the disgust, the indifference. She had witnessed it countless times before. But never like this. Never this plainly. Never this undeniably. Her fingers curled into fists in her lap. And then what? She asked, her voice lower, now sharper. Is this some kind of social experiment you wanted to see how the other side lives? James shook his head. No, he said. I just wanted to understand. Rachel let out a sharp breath, shaking her head, still trying to process it all. And what did you learn? James held her gaze. That people like you are rare. Rachel swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on her, too big to grasp all at once. She had given him her last $5. She had given him food. Without knowing. Without expecting anything in return. And now he was looking at her like he had just found something he never expected to find. Rachel looked away, her throat tight. So what happens now? James was silent for a moment. Then he said, Now, I help you. Rachel snapped her head up. James reached for his wallet again, but this time he didn't just flash his ID. He pulled out a sleek black credit card and held it out to her. This will cover Ethan's medical bills, he said. Every last cent. Rachel's breath caught. She stared at the card, at the sheer impossibility of this moment. You don't even know me. James smiled, a real smile, warm and sure. You didn't know me either, he said. But you still gave me everything you had. Rachel felt something crack in her chest, something she had held together by sheer will for so long. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She reached out her fingers, brushing against the edge of the card. And for the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a distant thing. It felt real. Rachel's fingers trembled as they hovered over the sleek black card, her pulse a rapid, uneven rhythm in her ears. The weight of everything pressed down on her at once. Ethan's fragile body hooked up to machines. The towering hospital bills at St. Vincent's Medical Center, far beyond what she could ever pay. The suffocating exhaustion of working 3 jobs just to scrape by. And now here it was, the solution to everything held between the fingers of a man she had thought just minutes ago was another forgotten figure on the street. Her breath was shallow. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. James didn't waver. He sat there steady, calm but firm, as if he had already decided this was happening. He was just waiting for her to catch up. You don't have to do this. Rachel whispered her words, barely escaping her lips. James exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. Yes, I do. His voice was quiet, but certain, as if the realization had settled into him just as deeply as it was settling into her. Because I can. And because you deserve it. The world felt too still, as if the air had been sucked out of it. As if time had stopped, leaving only the two of them sitting on that cold stretch of Oakwood Avenue between 2 vastly different lives. Rachel's hands curled into fists on her lap, her nails pressing into her palms. Her whole life. She had fought. She had struggled. She had endured carrying burdens no one should have to carry. Alone. And she had never asked for help, because help had never come. But now it had. And she didn't know how to take it. James must have seen it, must have understood the battle happening inside her, because his voice softened. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "This isn't charity. It's balance." Rachel blinked at him, confused. James leaned back against the gate, running a hand over his tired face. "You gave me something today," he said. "Not just food, not just a few dollars. You saw me when everyone else walked by. You stopped. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just a statistic. I wasn't just something for people to step over. I was a person again." His words hit something deep inside her, something raw and unspoken. She had spent years feeling invisible, moving through the world, as if she were nothing more than a machine built to work and survive. A nameless worker, cleaning floors, waiting tables, counting crumpled bills in dimly lit apartments, while the rest of the city thrived around her. She had never expected kindness, not real kindness. And now here it was, staring her in the face, daring her to take it. She swallowed, her voice unsteady. "What if I can't pay you back?" James smiled, a small, tired thing, but genuine. "Then don't." He shrugged. "Or do however you can. Help someone else. Change someone's life the way you just changed mine." He exhaled, glancing down at his hands. "You already did more for me than you realize." "What if I can't pay you back?" James smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. "Then don't." He shrugged. "Or if you want to pay it forward, help someone else. Change someone's life the way you just changed mine." He exhaled, his gaze dropping to his hands. "You've done more than you realize." Rachel let out a shaky breath, finally tightening her grip around the card, pressing it into her palm, as if testing its reality. It was real. This was real. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She met James's gaze, searching for hesitation, for doubt, for any sign that he would regret this the second she walked away. But there was nothing. Just quiet certainty. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, as if making a choice in real time. "Okay." Her voice was barely above a whisper. James's expression softened, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Rachel stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting too long on the cold pavement of Oakwood Avenue. Her body was still trying to process the weight of what had just happened. She clutched the card in her hand, tightening her grip, as if afraid it might disappear. James stood too, brushing dust off his worn-out jeans. The ragged disguise, now it felt out of place. He was still wearing it, but she no longer saw him the same way. Rachel hesitated, shifting on her feet, unsure of what to say, unsure of how to make sense of it all, unsure of how to thank someone who had just changed her life in a matter of minutes. So instead, she just asked, "Are you sure about this?" James let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head, as he shoved his hands into the pockets of his tattered jacket. "No," he admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Rachel exhaled sharply, a strange sound escaping from her throat, almost a laugh before she could stop it. For the first time in weeks, she actually laughed. She nodded, adjusting the strap of her grocery bag over her shoulder, feeling just a little lighter than before. After a brief pause, Rachel extended her hand. James glanced down at it, then took it without hesitation. His grip was warm, steady, a handshake that meant something. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady this time. James gave a small nod. "Don't waste it." Rachel squeezed his hand once before letting go, turning on her heel and walking away. Walking away from Whitmore Mansion. Walking away from the cold pavement of Oakwood Avenue. Walking away from the version of herself who had once believed that no one in this world cared. She didn't look back, because for the first time in a long time she had something to walk toward. 1 year later, the air was warmer, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and the distant laughter of children playing in the park. Rachel walked with ease, now her steps no longer burdened by exhaustion, no longer weighed down by endless shifts and unpaid bills. Life was different. Better. A year had passed, and in that time she had found something she never thought she would again: stability. With James's help, she had secured a steady job, not just one of survival, but one where she was valued, where she could breathe. She had moved her kids into a safer neighborhood, a home with space, with warmth, with a future. Ethan was healthy, running again, laughing again. And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't wake up dreading the day ahead. Now standing outside Bluebird Cafe, where they had agreed to meet, she saw him again. James was seated at a small table by the window, no longer in the tattered clothes of that cold morning, no longer carrying the weight of his experiment. Now James looked like himself, a man in control, composed, but somehow lighter than before. When he spotted her, he stood, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "You look good," he said as she approached. Rachel smirked, settling into the chair across from him. "And you look richer." James laughed, shaking his head. "I guess some things never change." A comfortable silence settled between them before he exhaled and leaned forward slightly, his expression turning thoughtful. "I owe you a lesson, you know," he said. "You taught me something I didn't expect to learn." Rachel raised an eyebrow, waiting. His smile softened. "That sometimes the people who have the least give the most." Rachel studied him for a moment, then nodded, her own smile growing. "And I learned something too," she said. "That kindness always finds its way back, sometimes in the most unexpected ways." James lifted his coffee cup in a silent toast. Rachel mirrored the gesture. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. What do you think about James's decision? If you were in Rachel's position, would you be willing to accept help? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else. If this story touched you, hit like and share to spread the message of kindness and compassion. Sometimes a small act can change a life. Stay with us to discover more meaningful stories. Thank you for supporting the channel. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.